So, it seems there is an interest in the demonic encounter, and I am a man of my word. So as I said, here it is. To add some context to the situation, this encounter occurred while I was on active duty, Marine Corps, in mid-November of 2013, not too long after I turned 21, and I was stationed in San Diego at the time. So needless to say, I was young, dumb, and very hormone-driven at the time. The story is long, so buckle up. The woman I was dating at the time, she and her family had immigrated to the United States from Kuwait during the first Gulf War, and whatever it was had followed them to America. From what they told me, and from what I experienced, it didn't like men in the house. What I experienced with it, so a few days before these events, my ex and I had gone to my unit's Marine Corps birthday ball, where we had gotten a professional former picture taken of us that had ended up being framed and placed on the dresser in her room, and she still had the roses that I had gotten her that night of the ball when I picked her up. My then girlfriend, her mother, and I, along with their 3 cats and dog, were all in the living room watching TV. At some point, we all heard a random loud thud from upstairs, from directly above the living room, where my ex's bedroom was. Of course, because I was the only man in the house at the time, I ended up going upstairs to investigate. When I got upstairs to her room, I looked around and there was no one else in the room. However, the picture I mentioned earlier, frame and all, had been taken apart and laid on the floor. The really weird part about that is the fact that the glass of the picture frame, the backing of the picture frame, and the frame itself were all arranged in a almost perfectly shaped triangle, with each of the 3 pieces of the frame forming the corners of the triangle. Additionally, the vase with the roses had been knocked down onto the floor, just outside of the triangle, with the water from the vase in a puddle in the center of the triangle. The picture that had been in the frame was now sitting face down in the puddle of water in the triangle, almost like it had been purposely placed there. The roses that had been in the vase looked as though they had been pulled out of the vase and thrown across the room before the vase had even hit the floor. At the time, I had taken pictures of the carnage, but the phone I had them on ended up crapping itself, so I lost those pictures. After I had found out what had happened, I told my ex and her mom, and my ex and I cleaned up the mess, putting the picture frame back together and getting the roses back in the vase with fresh water. A little later that evening, I had to go back up to her room for something, and that's when I noticed that the edges of the rose petals, just the very edges, had all turned black. Another point in the evening, I walked past her mother's room, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a prayer shawl start swinging on its hook, with no wind in the room. Then, even later that evening, I had stepped outside to smoke a cigarette out by the pool. So I was standing there, looking at the garden, my back to the house. Suddenly, I had that feeling that something was watching me. So I turned around, and in one of those second-floor windows was a face that I can only describe as half man, half pig, and was pressed hard against the window, staring at me, wide-eyed, with an ear-to-ear smile, showing a mouthful of sharp teeth that even now is sending chills down my spine just typing this, just remembering it. So not wanting to let it get the best of me, nor wanting to waste a good smoke, I turned back around and just kept smoking. Every now and then looking back over my shoulder to see that, yep, it was still there, still smiling and still staring at me. Once I finished my smoke, I went back inside the house and told my ex and her mother about it. They took me up to the room in question, which was a bedroom that was used for storage. There was too much stuff stacked in front of the window for there had been a person standing at that window. So to this day, I have no explanation for that disturbing face. Understandably, my ex and her mother were scared by what was going on and asked me to stay the night because they didn't want to leave their home, but they didn't want to be there by themselves. So of course, I said yes, They set up one of the guest bedrooms for me to sleep in. It was finally time to go to bed, and I walked into the guest room, where a lamp near the bed was the only source of light. My ex had left the lamp on for me to see to get to bed. I had only taken a couple of steps into the room before the lamp turned off by itself. At that point, I decided that the couch in the living room looked more comfortable. So I get set up with a pillow and a blanket on the couch, and their old, roughly 16-year-old cat was up on the back of the couch above me sleeping too. I fell asleep rather quickly, despite everything that had gone on that night, only to be woken up a few hours later by that cat having jumped down from the back of the couch and onto my stomach. Still half asleep, I just laid there, looking at this old cat on top of me. He then started to do that meow, aggressive meow that cats do when they see something they don't like. It took me a moment to realize that he wasn't looking at me, but rather at something behind me. So I gathered what testicular fortitude I had left at that point, and slowly turned to see what he was looking at. Part of me knew better, and part of me was fully expecting to see the face from earlier that night. Luckily, all that I could see was one of those fake palm trees with Christmas lights on behind me. So the cat must have seen something that thankfully I was unable to. The only real explanation I ever got about what this thing was that they believed it was something, possibly a jinn, that had attached itself to the women in their family and had followed them to the United States from Kuwait. Aside from that, I was also told that whatever it was had driven my ex's father to an extremely low point, mental health-wise, and then to drug use, and eventually it had driven him out of the house. Whatever it was, it seemed to not like men, and certainly seemed like it didn't want me around.
Don't forget to sleep with your lights on.